Hi, friends of the planet. Monica here today, and I am thrilled to have with us a good friend of mine, John Gray, who is the Director of Legislation for the Service Employees International Union, SEIU. John, thanks so much for being with us today.
Happy to be here. Thanks for inviting me.
It's an important time for labor unions, and particularly as they interact with the environmental movement. So we're thrilled to talk with you more about that. Many people are actually surprised to learn that there's so much support for climate action among union members. Why do you think climate and environment are such important issues for your members right now?
It's kind of twofold. One, it's where they work, and the other is where they live. Our workers are direct facing to so much of what happens in the world today, that they take care of the elderly, they take care of the young, they are important in the schools, doing the support services of the schools, they take care of buildings. As the world changes and they are affected in their work, they reach out to the union and say, how can you help us with this? And this particular issue is one that has impacted all of us, as we know. We find it in various ways, and people who are on the front lines experience it even more specifically. So if you're a home care worker and you have an elderly patient and their only means of doing anything is for you to show up at their house, all of a sudden, because of all the weather events, it is like impossible for this to happen. It stays on their mind as to what's going on in the world. And so we've spent a lot of time talking to our members, and they appreciate and understand that these are things that they are outside of their specific individual control, and they want their union to play a role in it. The other part of it, as I said, is where they live, which is our large portion of our union is Black and brown people who live in communities of color who are disproportionately affected by some of the things that are happening. Not the same, but when, for instance, Flint happened and the water quality went down, we have lots of members in Flint. They came to their union to say, what's going on here? What can we do? How does this happen to us? And that happens across the country in communities all over. You all know about the crises in a variety of areas, including sewage and other things that are beginning to affect people's lives.
So, John, you touched on a lot of points I wanted to ask, but SEIU represents workers on the very front lines of this pandemic, and they also happen to be largely people of color. And I wanted to ask, how is SEIU working to keep your members centered in environmental and climate policies, especially as it pertains to environmental justice issues?
It works the other way in many ways. They keep us centered on these issues. I think that our model, they come to us with the things that they can't affect in their daily lives. And a lot of people who are working in these, have regular day jobs can't do something. They don't feel themselves to be empowered to work on an issue as big as what's happening to the planet. But they are affected by it, and they know something has to happen. And so it helps them to know that we are participating. And that's how that happens. More, they come to us and we realize that it's an issue that has to be addressed. You can't delay the future. You can't delay what's happening to people.
People, I think of labor unions in terms of pay and working conditions, but they don't necessarily tie both those things to the climate crisis and how much they are intertwined with one another, particularly working conditions. When I think about heat or the health threats that are more prevalent because of climate change for your members, it doesn't take a lot. It just takes a little to kind of get to that next step and understand why it's so important to them.
No, it totally is that thing. But you'd be surprised the kinds of conversations that people have when they are given the space to sort of think about it, and they are looking for someone who can help take some burden off their thought. And the same way that they look to their union to help them plan for retirement, because that's something that, it's hard to, if you're poor, to do all that you need to do in order to be able to retire, but you have a friend in an organization that's kind of trying to help look at that issue. They look to their union for some of these other things. They've been doing it for years on leave, on trying to make it a way for them to be able to take care of their families when they're sick, or make sure that they are available to spend time with their kids for school events. These are all things that the union actually is engaged in, trying to make it so that they can do that. You mentioned the pandemic. The pandemic, of course, has accelerated all of this for all of us, but especially for these workers who are also on the front lines trying to help everyone navigate their lives. It doesn't take much to go, so what is the next step? What does the future hold for me and for my kids? And how do I make it better? And once you get into a conversation with people, whether they are working at a fast food establishment or working as a home care worker or cleaning the cabins in airplanes, it gets there. And you can have these conversations. They can understand exactly how do we make this better. The other piece that I didn't mention is that many people say, what can I do to help make me better prepared for the jobs of the future? And so in the case of some of our building services people, property services people who manage buildings and who know or they work in the support of a hospital, they know that there are changes afoot and they personally want to be better prepared for whatever the future holds. And they understand that there are changes that will happen in the world, and they want to know how they can be better prepared. And in many cases, our union has worked with some of the industry groups that are working on these issues as well, building industry groups in New York or hospitals in California, to find ways to make themselves prepared for buildings that are designed differently and perform differently.
Your union also has been really strongly behind the Green New Deal, which has been demonized by the right. And I wonder, what the Green New Deal really means to your coalition, because people often try and portray the Green New Deal as sort of anti-job, and that would be anti-union. So how do you square those two things?
It sort of relates back to that earlier answer, which is we think of the Green New Deal as pro the next set of jobs. And so what we want to do is make sure that our folks we're thinking as creatively as possible for whatever is next. You'd be surprised how people, when you get on a conversation with them about the future, conversations with goodwill, they can try to see what would be the next thing for them to do for themselves or for their families. People do this all the time at all levels. It's not hard to figure out, I need this, or I need to learn more about that. And that to me is a way to get people to engage on. And the Green New Deal is a good example of forward thinking about how do we create a place for ourselves to be secure at the same time we deal with this very large problem that we individually can't deal with.
So it's a way for them to make room for themselves in the future.
I think that would be the way I would characterize this, as how do I find a way? You're a doorman in New York City, and the building is considering things to change to deal with changes that are afoot, either imposed by the government or things that the owners would like to do. How do you, as a building person, figure out how to perform your job in these new circumstances?
Yeah.
So it's good for a union to be helping them navigate that space. And so sometimes that's the space that we do.
Yeah, as service workers, you're probably more dependent on other things, other forces in the economy, because that's the nature of these jobs.
I think it's the nature of a lot of jobs, actually. We're all kind of not as independent as we'd like to think we are. And this pandemic has really helped us to understand that. But I think that people who are in these positions, in the jobs that we represent, are very much dependent on forces outside of their control. And so being able to have a place, a union or somebody to help them look out for their best interests in those circumstances, I think is a good comfort.
I wanted to shift gears a little bit. And when then candidate Biden was on the campaign trail this past year, he talked a lot about environmental injustice and how his administration might address some of the issues that disproportionately affect a lot of your members. Since President Biden has been sworn in, he recently released a big package of environmental executive orders, and environmental justice was certainly a big portion of that. So I wanted to ask, how do you think the administration did? Did it live up to some of the campaign promises? Is it a good start? What is your position?
We have really celebrated the new administration and their attempt to sort of at least staunch some of the bad policies from the last administration and put us on a trajectory so that we can be in a better place going forward. I kind of think of it just the way our members think of our union, is that I know that he has the same intentions, or this administration seems to have the same regard for these challenges that we do, and it makes us a little more secure that someone's watching what would be the best approaches to things. I'm saying that to avoid going into detail on all these CEOs because I'm not as familiar with all of them.
You work on legislative issues all the time. Tell us about whether the union can help, or how can the union help the congressional infrastructure package, the stimulus package. How are you all able to engage to help President Biden get some of these green stimulus provisions done, infrastructure done, things that will really help your members?
Our union is a very active one. And we are both active, particularly in the political arena, in the political season, as well as in the governing part of the year. And we are anxious to hold the members of Congress and the administration's foot to the fire as to what they committed to do and what the results are. We have accountability because we realize what happened in this last election, the lengths that our members went to help get President Biden in office and all of these elected representatives. And we know that going back into the election will be very, very difficult. The next election season will be very difficult if we don't have things to show for it. As I said, our members are a variety of members. I've been talking about a lot of folks in a particular category, but we're the largest healthcare union in the country. We have adjunct professors. We have also residents. So we have a broad swath of people who care about a lot of different things. But we always are very clear about our agenda when we go into an election season. And we've been very clear this time. And things like the increases in the minimum wage, making sure that state and local governments have the resources that are needed during this COVID time, making sure that we have a climate agenda that is practical and also affects the people who are most disparately affected, are all things that we have been advocating for during the election year. And we know that going into the next election year, we have to have things to show for it. And so that's what we do. We go back and make sure that people are aware of what they committed to and help them understand that it's really challenging for us to advocate for them and for our members to understand that we should be advocating for them if they can't deliver.
I have to say, I'm a member of your union. I forgot until you
Good,
mentioned
good.
it. But as an adjunct professor at Georgetown University. We are members of SEIU. So as one of your members,
yes.
I am grateful,
Yes.
John, for all you do on our behalf.
Yep.
So we really appreciate the time that you've taken to talk with us today about the intersection of unions and climate.
Thank you both. This is really fun, and I always enjoy talking about our union.
Well, I hope we can do it again soon. We're really looking forward to all the great work that you guys are going to be up to this year.
Absolutely. Take care.
Thanks, John.
Thanks,
Bye-bye.
John.